St. Juan's home for the ADD.
Hello, this is Quan3217, bringing you episode 11 of Bring Your Own Calm. Today we start out in a very inconvenient total eclipse of the sun by the moon. And it's inconvenient because we are a solar-powered spacecraft and we want to get some power. And today's mission is to get into orbit and, as usual, and then to try and rescue some fool idiot who got himself into space without any engines. Who knows how that happens? Maybe he's just generated up there. Yeah, so we've sent up a sandstone yoke with an autopilot. Yeah, there's that darn inconvenient eclipse. It is pretty, though. Not near as rare in the Kerbin system as it is on Earth, because since the planes of the equator and the moon's orbit and the Kerbin's orbit are all aligned, it happens pretty much every month. So we'll just have to deal with this inconvenience for now, and we'll be back in a moment. And as promised, making the braking maneuver, getting over next to this idiot, whatever his name is, pulling up right next door, and cut off. Yeah, I'd say that was close enough. So now our idiot gets to go on a little bit of a spacewalk. You gotta go, the journey of 10,000 miles starts with a single space step. And you just gotta take that step and you just gotta let it go. We just gently drift from one spacecraft to the other. Look at that. No parachute, no heat shield, no. What were you thinking? How did you even get there? Okay, well, nice little sandstone. Ready to give you a ride home. Leave no Kerbal behind. And grab on and climb in. And we are ready to go home. We have captured another Kerbinaut and will enslave him and put him to work in the space mines, in the science mines, as soon as we get him back down on the ground. See, we can learn a lot about the social conditions of Kerbinauts and about the biology of Kerbinauts just by observing their in-game behavior. So, for instance, a Kerbal spacecraft does not carry any oxygen. It also doesn't have to carry any food or any water or any life support really, except for pressure. And also notice that Kerbinauts are green, which leads one to hypothesize that Kerbals are in fact plants, or at least plant-animal hybrids, and with their green skin that they are able to survive indefinitely without need of food or water, or without need of food or oxygen. They might need water, but then again, in-game they don't seem to. And also we note that at the Kerbal Space Center, at the astronaut complex, we pay for a Kerbinaut once, and then we work them to death for their entire life until they're used up and thrown away. And if that's not slavery, then I don't know what is. There is no point in trying to escape, so just get your EVA report and get back in here. You work for us now. You are ours. Resistance is futile. Your technological and biological diversity shall be made to serve the collective. You will be assimilated. In fact, you already have been assimilated. Now looking at the landing leg tab can mean only one thing. It's time to go upward and onward. It's time to go further, higher, faster, and stronger. And the whole Daft Punk. It's time to shoot the moon. Since we haven't changed the rocket itself, only the payload, we've attached legs to the outside of the rocket. It's still a zebra, but this one is a sandstone zebra L. And we shall put it in the hands of our best, our bravest Kerbinaut, Jebediah Kerman, and go tell him to go find the moon and go land on it. We'll carefully monitor staging here because we still haven't invested any Separatrons. From a good stage. Boosters did contact each other, but not until they were well clear of the vehicle. Well, Jeb, I have to say that wasn't one of your better launches. We have only half of our fuel left in this stage, and this is the only rocket that we have left on board, which has got to get us out to the moon, into orbit, into the descent orbit, land it on the surface, launch back into orbit, and back onto the trans-Kerbin trajectory. I don't know if we've got enough fuel to do it. Yes, this rocket design reminds me in many ways of the Soviet N-1 project, where they used the first 3 stages to get into orbit, and then the 4th stage to head towards the moon. And then the 5th stage, they called it that, or they called it Block D, which is the 5th letter in the Russian alphabet. It was used to do course corrections on the way to the moon, and it was used to insert into orbit around the moon, insert both the return module and the lander into orbit around the moon. And then once the lander detached, it was used to do powered descent, do most of the powered descent, break out of orbit and head towards the ground. And only a few hundred meters above the ground would its fuel finally be exhausted, and the lander would continue back down on its own engine. The Block E, they called it the 6th stage of the rocket. For comparison, the Sandstone Zebra L that we're watching fly here, its upper stage does the following jobs. It finishes the boost into low Kerbal orbit, it ejects into the translunar trajectory, it does any course corrections along the way to the moon, it enters orbit of the moon, it performs the descent and landing maneuver, it launches back into lunar orbit, and performs the insertion back to the trans-Kerbal trajectory, and then provides power and antenna on the way home until it's dropped off like an unused can of soda just before entry interface. So that's about 10 different jobs. Take that, Block D. And so, while we wait for Jebediah to complete his epic voyage to the moon, we're gonna go on Epic Voyage Crossroads number 4, the quest for more funds. And we have a contract here just to haul a part into flight. It's got to hit the right entry conditions, it's got to hit the right flight conditions. But the part today is heat shield, so the altitude is pretty high and the speed is pretty fast. All we have to do is haul it. We don't have to test it in any particular condition. But one of the things that I really want to do is just try out this sounding rocket again. Like I said before, real sounding rockets will spin up on the way down, and they will try and enter, they'll try and do a belly flop, they'll try and enter sideways. They spin up as fast as they can, using the last of their gas in order to use up the gas so that it's safe when it lands. And they spin up as fast as they can so that it has some gyrostability while it enters the atmosphere. And it turns out it doesn't matter. The thing tumbles like crazy, and that's okay. Because it's just a can, it's just a aluminum can falling through the sky. And as long as no one part of it's pointed into the wind for too long, then it works fine. So what we're going to do with this thing is boost it up, get the flight conditions, and then on the way down, we will point the nose at the horizon and spin it up as fast as we can horizontally and see how well that stabilizes it on the way down. because this is the one that was a lawn dart before. We tried to enter it tail first, but eventually the fins overcame the SAS and it had to come down. It came down nose first. And it came down so fast that it wasn't able to pop the parachute in time, and we were not able to save that flight. We'll see if we can do better this time. And I think I've rambled enough to get us up to altitude. And I think this is performing as expected. We've spun it up as fast as we can around its long axis, and all the fins are at one end, so there's going to be a torque around the pitch axis. But because it's spinning, the gyroscope is going to precess instead of pitch. And we can see it now, and it'll keep precessing like this, precessing in yaw, until it gets low enough that the drag on the fins starts slowing down the rocket. And then we turn back into a lawn dart. Well, I don't know. It's not looking good, folks. We're trying to stabilize this thing retrograde, and it's not doing it, so... Well... You do what you can. You pays your monies, and you takes your chance. And if you're a machine, it's not for you to question why. It's just for you to go or die. Parachute's not green yet. Parachute's not safe to deploy. And of course we got to worry about parachute safety because, hitting the ground that hard isn't safe. So, well, that's the end of Crossroads Able 4. We did get the funds, though, so that was a mission success. So in the meantime, our intrepid explorer Jebediah Kerman has progressed ever closer to the moon and to destiny. However, in his zeal to send home scientific observations, he ran down the battery running the radio, and he ran down the battery with the spacecraft in an orientation where the solar panel is in the shade. You're not going to get any power that way. So we're going to do the slightly unorthodox maneuver of starting up the orbit insertion early, just so we can run the alternator in the engine and generate enough power to start maneuvering ourselves, because right now we don't even have enough power to spin the wheels. And with that early maneuver, we have cut off enough velocity that Jebediah is now in orbit. It's far earlier, so his original planned lunar orbit insertion is no good. But we'll just replan this thing, and we'll get ourselves into a nice circular orbit. Next time. Next time around. And they did this on Apollo also. It wasn't nearly as long of an orbit, but especially on Apollo 8. They weren't very confident with the service module engine. They didn't know how it would perform, and there was a part of the lunar orbit insertion where if the engine cut out at just the wrong time, they would crash into the moon. And so, in order to avoid that, they made a really reliable engine. Two, they had a plan to abort so that even if they got into that crash orbit, they weren't going to crash for several more minutes or even hours. But they had an abort plan. They knew what to do if the engine broke down at what time, and blah, 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 blah. A lot of these weren't really survivable, but the mission planning guys had to have something. And so what they ended up coming up with for their nominal plan was that they were going to enter into an elliptical orbit. Not this elliptical, but still they weren't going to try and burn all the way down to a circular orbit, because if you burn a little bit past a circular orbit, you end up in a landing orbit or a crash orbit. And since they weren't carrying a lunar module, since they had no intention of landing, that's obviously not what you want to do. So it's a lot like The Price is Right, where the winner is the one who gets closest to the right answer without going over. And so in that game, you always bias things so that you don't try and guess what the answer is. You try and guess a little bit lower than what the answer is. And that's the same thing that they did on Apollo. They didn't try and hit the exact circular orbit. They aimed for a little bit less than circular orbit, and then they cleaned it up the next time around. And Jebediah is going to follow the same plan here. And during that orbit, the guys back on the ground ran the numbers, looked at the fuel remaining, looked at the delta V necessary to do the mission, and figured out that Jeb just doesn't have the delta V to do the mission. So we're going to come home, because as they say, aim for the moon, because even if you miss, you're out among the stars, where you can drift endlessly through space in a spacecraft with no power and no way to get home, as a monument to the hubris and stupidity of kerbal-kind. They do say that, right? Anyway, I just said it, so someone said it. So rather than do that, we're just going to have discretion be the better part of valor. There are old pilots and there are bold pilots, and we want Jeb to be an old pilot and not a bold pilot. So we'll just bring him home safe and sound and worry about landing on the moon next time. And while we're at it, we will call this an episode. We'll see you next time. And remember, if at first you don't succeed, fly, fly again.